Tendons.
Stiffness.
Ground contact times.
Bouncy.
Velocity.
Speed jumper. That's it.
Compliance.
Oh, compliance. I like that one. Genetics. All right.
What are we talking
Tendons.
about? What are these words?
We're talking about elasticity. We're talking about stiffness. We're talking about how to use, develop, get better at that quality. I think a lot of the time we talk about strength, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like it, at least from what I've seen in feedback, people feel like we chase numbers. Yeah, there's a number I'm chasing. It's called stiffness. No, they specifically said in the weight room, which the weight room is an easy way to test numbers. So yeah, my name is John. I coach many of the highest jumpers in the world. And this is Isaiah Rivera. He's one of the highest jumpers in the world.
Hello.
And I had a really interesting conversation yesterday with Mr. JC Ditch, Dr. JC Ditch. He actually knows Hunter, and Hunter's in town, by the way. Hunter, Dom, they're all in town. But he actually knows them because he dunks at that same gym. But yeah, he has a PhD. He actually studied post-activation potentiation, which we'll get into in another podcast. But yeah, JC's a super good dude and very, very intelligent and loves jumping as well. So yesterday I was talking on the phone with him. He's like, oh yeah, I would love to see Isaiah during like a PAP window, which means like it's basically a potentiation window. Post-activation potentiation, is that what it is? Anyways, there's a window of time where you get huge performance gains. He's like, oh my God, it'd be so freaky. And he like just started like stuttering. He was so like in awe and shock of your strength and elasticity. And I was like, oh, chill out now. Don't give him too much credit. All right. Don't make his head any bigger than it already is. So we were just chit chatting. And it kind of brought to, and then I saw a couple more comments yesterday about like people were like, oh, you talked about blah, blah, blah. I've never heard you do that before. And elasticity, like I said. So I want to cover this topic. Talking about this, we talked about a lot of the different elements of it, but I have some different thoughts, and maybe what we can do is just kind of cover these topics. The first one that I think we should talk about is genetics. So, Isaiah, what do you know about genetics, elasticity? Like, what's your kind of understanding of that?
Can you be more specific?
Tendons and genetics.
You're talking about genetics or
Is there a
elasticity?
genetic predisposition to like your tendons
Oh,
being stiffer, bouncier, or less stiff?
yeah.
Or
So elasticity, as I recall, is a material's ability to return to its original shape after getting stretched. So I like to think of a rubber band. It's how badly does the rubber band want to return to its shape after you stretch it and let go. The structure that has the most elastic qualities in the human body are your tendons, and elasticity is primarily determined by stiffness and how far you stretch it. And I believe it's primarily stiffness that's like very genetic. Like people have everybody has different levels of base levels of stiffness in their tendons. A lot of it is developed through like your upbringing. And then there's other genetic components too. For example, how many type 2 fat fibers you have, which allow you to stretch the tendon further, um, and your nervous system and all those things. But yeah, that's my answer to your question.
No, it's good. So we definitely know that there is a genetic component to the tendon qualities that you have. And this was explained to me by a few different people over the years, one of which was Thomas Kortenbeck. He basically said that the greater the cross-sectional area of, which means like when you cut something in half and you look at it, if you were to cut a tendon in half, like how thick that would be. And then also the volume of it. And I might be a little bit off with this explanation, but it's adding in a little bit of Jonathan's flair. There is that's going to be so it's the material that it's made of, like the type of collagen that's in it. And there's different types of collagen. There's like 5 types of collagen, 1 through 5. I believe collagen 3 is 2 and 3, I think, are like the most functional elastic forms of collagen. But then there's also like elastin in there. Water plays a role in tendons as well. There are a bunch of proteoglycans, which like are protein sugar molecules that have like different components that turn into different types of collagen over time. So it's like a very complex structure, and it is a little bit of material science, but you're dealing with a lot of different materials in the tendon. So when you have a tendon that is stiffer, you have more of those stiffer elements, and you are, bound together very there's a high density of them. There's a big cross-sectional area, and there's probably a really big length. There's actually in a book, I can't remember if it's Peak, or whatever that book is that I told you, a range, but it talks about how like the number one indicator of success in high jump is like Achilles tendon length. Or it was like Achilles tendon volume or something like that. Like they had one metric for it. I think it's probably volume because like Stephen Holmes doesn't have a long Achilles tendon. And it kind of makes sense because if you have more stiff tissue and you're generally more explosive, and if you're only looking at that demographic, the guy with the bigger, stiffer, longer Achilles tendon is going to have more of a spring-like takeoff, and that's going to be good for rotation, and that's going to be good for running really fast, which is why it's a huge indicator of success. So when we're looking at I guess you could call it like material science of this, you really do have to look at each of those components and how they work together to give you whatever that elastic property is. There's probably like an actual value that explains this. The stiffness constant is probably, the problem is that tendons are different stiffnesses for different levels of energy going through it. And that makes it a little bit more complicated. For example, if you palpate your tendon right now, it's soft, and that's because it's viscoelastic. And I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments that will say, "Oh, you don't know anything about biochemistry or physics," and I'm going to be like, "You're right. I'm doing my best in terms of biomechanics." But so yeah, it has different stiffnesses at different levels, and then the amount of force that you put through it gives it more or less stiffness, and that curve or shape is going to also be different depending on the individual. So there's a lot of variables that impact that. Okay, and then also how you use it is going to be mega different. So genetics play a major role in this for all the reasons that you just said, right? Like if you have more type 2 fibers, you have more alpha motor neurons, you have more stiff tendon tissue, more volume, cross-sectional area of that tendon, you're probably going to have a more elastic takeoff. So type 2 fibers allow you to use those better. And then you pair that with the fact that you've practiced jumping, in your case, a bajillion and a half times. I think a lot of people don't realize, maybe they do, but I think it kind of hit me the other day how trained that capacity is. You see it all the time with these young kids that we coach coming up. Like Dylan McCarthy is another one I've been coaching. I mean, dude, the kid jumps like infinite times a week. I'm not kidding. It's like 500 times a week of dunk attempts. And I know this because I've been running his training. That's a secret, but I have. And another one is like Hoopin' Nate. Like Hoopin' Nate is finally at the point where he's about to dunk. It's been a long time. He's still like 5'6" or something like that, like 5'5". He's tiny. He is going to get taller. I think he's going to be a late bloomer, be like 6'1", 6'2" by the time he graduates, or probably like freshman year of college. Hopefully he still loves dunking. A lot of kids during that like development just fall out of love with it after they get the first dunk, but I think Nate will stick with it. Anyways, so he's developing that skill. Nate is not like crazy strong. He's getting way stronger, especially for his body weight, but he's not crazy strong. Nate is like the perfect example of someone who is on a good long-term athletic development trajectory. Like we have pretty much set him up for a perfect long-term athletic development, and we didn't overcoach him. We didn't overcue him. We let him learn through experience. He's very driven, so he took the time to like do it himself. He enjoys it a lot. And he's someone where you might look at him and say, well, you don't have like, the best connective tissue, or you don't have the best nervous system, or you don't have like the best genetics or whatever. But because he's trained so effectively his entire life, his ceiling is so high. Like I think his ceiling is, I can't hypothesize because I don't know, but I can tell you for sure it's really, really high. He's got a very, very, very high genetic potential. He's got perfect technique. His outputs are still relatively low, and he's not even fully developed yet, but he has perfect technique in his lifting as well. Like, dude, that is a recipe for success and building one of the most insane jumpers you possibly can. So when we talk about elasticity, I think a lot of people think that it's just this genetic innate thing, but it's not. You look at someone like Nate, and you can quickly see that he's the result of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of jump reps. And people oftentimes want to just attribute that to plyometrics and say, well, if he would have done, plyos or whatever, he would have gotten there, right? And on paper, you're the same way, right? Like, so is Dylan McCarthy. None of those guys did plyos. But if you put them on a force plate, every scientist in the room would be like, he's so freaky. He's the most elastic jumper ever. And then 5 years later, when I get your lifts all up to like 320 pounds in a clean, and in Nate's case, let's say it's like 270 in a clean, and back squatting 350, and in Dylan's case, it's something similar. People are going to look at that and say, wow, like he's so strong, and you know, he could, like, he's strong and elastic. That's pretty unheard of. And some of this is inspired by JC's conversation. And no, this isn't JC. This isn't me saying anything negative. It's just
You're explaining
sparked.
why. You're
Yeah,
explaining
yeah. It
why.
sparked interest. It sparked interest in the conversation.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff does lead you to become, and there was other comments too that also inspired this, because people are like, well, you only chase numbers. Like, why? Because that's how you get better tendons too, right? Like, the numbers I'm chasing in the weight room are not just for the sake of chasing numbers. And oftentimes I don't even necessarily care about the number on paper with the squat or power clean. I'll post it as a win or something like that, because I think it's really productive and good, and it's an indicator of progress and increases motivation and intrinsically. But at the end of the day, what's happening is we're getting tendon adaptation from strength work. Like, that's the
Yeah.
number one way to get tendon adaptation. And then we're actualizing it, you know, in other forms, whether it's in the sprints, could be jump circuits, could be tempo running, could be whatever dynamic in the warm up. It could be in the actual jumps themselves, the actual takeoffs on the weekend. It could be plyos when I put the plyos in, but I use it very sparingly because I understand the cost of doing that. And it's very, very dependent on the person. In Nate's case, he's a high school basketball player. Like, he's playing basketball and dunking a couple times a week, but he's getting a bunch of elastic contacts and lifting very little. In McCarthy's case, he's doing everything a lot, but not sprinting at all, mostly just dunking like 500 times a week and then doing a ton of other stuff. And then in your case, it's like you don't do any plyos, you dunk very minimally, and in the weight room, we push really hard. Like, those are three very, very different scenarios. One guy doesn't lift at all, the other guy, you, lifts a bunch, and the other guy does a bunch of both, right? And it's like, and then you have me. I sprint and run tempo and do a lot of long warm-ups and do general work and things like that. And I don't really push the lifting up too crazy. So you have to kind of identify, and we always say this, but it does depend. You need to know what time of year you're at, what your goals are, and where that athlete is in their progression. And then you blend that together to come to a conclusion that makes the most amount of sense to make them get the outcome of being an elastic jumper. Like, in 10 years, we're going to get the same results, you know, with Nate. He's going to be a freak athlete, like I said. And people are going to say, they're going to look back and be like, oh, well, he's just so genetically gifted. No, dude, he freaking jumped every day for 10 years. Like, from development all the way through high school, and was obsessed with it. Like, and then we built on top of that. And you and I have kind of identified that is a really important key factor. Donovan's another one, right? Like, everyone sees Donovan now, like, hitting it a minute or a second in the air. And they're like, oh, he's always been like that. And I'm like, he jumped for years and years and years. And then we built on top of that. Like, that's kind of what we identify in guys. And oftentimes we work with guys, they come to us when they're 22, 23 and they're plateaued. Like, that's when people reach out to us. They don't reach out to us when they're like 15. Why would they need to? What they're doing is probably working. They're getting better every day. That's a big realization I've had. So yeah, that's a big rant about it. Do you have any thoughts about some of the things I said?
Is that what you would recommend to somebody? Is
I
jump
think it
every
depends.
day till you break, essentially, and then
Depends
come
on
to
health.
us?
Yeah, I think it depends on health, but yeah, generally, I mean, not every day, but if you're a really light kid and you're like 12, 13, 11, whatever, and you're light, I'm talking you are light. Just make it fun, dude. Go out and just have fun. Like, it's a weekend and you don't have anything to do and you're playing your PlayStation. Like, I was playing GameCube or whatever, and I would just go out with my cousin. We would have dunk contests on a low rim. Do that. Go do
Yeah.
that. Like, and if you like it, do
So
it more, you know, and learn the lifts. I think that's the other one, is just get proficient at moving, learn how to run, be a part of a track team, do a lot of
yeah.
sports, learn the lifts. If you want to, you don't have to stick to the program perfectly. Just go have fun and enjoy it, because that's what's going to give you the greatest amount of buy-in. And that's what's going to help you develop those elastic qualities that will help you later in life.
All right.
That's my
So
advice.
now you have
We don't get a
different.
lot of 14-year-olds, by the way. Like, we basically have none of those kids. We have some, but not really
Yeah.
many. They're all hurt. All the ones we get are
So
hurt.
so now you have somebody in their mid-20s to mid-30s. They don't have a a background of jumping every single day as a kid, but now they want to try to jump higher. Would you recommend that to somebody else, or would you recommend a
No,
different approach? I'm
I don't
thinking
think so.
Webster, like someone like Webster.
No, I actually don't think so at all. I think oftentimes what happens is your window's gone and your risk of injury is so high at this point. Like
Yep.
you will probably get hurt. Like almost certainly you're going to get hurt if you try that. I don't think I've seen anyone successfully do it. The only one I can think of is Ryan from California that dunks with the California group. I think he did it for a period of time, but even then he plateaued very quickly from it. That's my personal
Yeah.
opinion. I haven't seen him like East Baying on 10 feet or anything, right? I mean, he still lifts and stuff like that, but like he basically stopped lifting completely and just started jumping. And he was a distance runner. He's very robust. He's very light. He doesn't create as much absolute force as other guys because he is light and that's more
Yeah.
forgiving on his body. Whereas, someone like me, I'm not going to be able to do that because my outputs are really high and I leak a lot of energy. So that's and I have a history of injury, right? That's a big red flag. If you're there's certain like indicators that I would tell you to be aware of, that you
Yeah.
should avoid doing everyday jumping. And I'm a good example of someone that should not jump every day, that will quickly get hurt and regret it. So no, I don't think that's a good solution. At that point, you have to take a pretty balanced approach. I think you have to be really, really young. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think
Which,
this is
by the
a.
way, guys,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
we always forget to do this. Go to THPstrength.com if you would like our input on what you should do with your training. We are pretty good at what we do. We have a discount going on. Just go to THPstrength.com. That discount's right there on the front of the page. So
yeah,
just an aside, I'm trying to be better about plugging THP on
yeah.
these because we always forget.
Well, I feel like this is a good place to close this out. There's a lot of information here, but Isaiah said he wanted more information. I was like, happily, brother.
Yeah.
We saw a funny comment the other day. It made me laugh. So I hope we get that comment again from last year. Um, but thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Peace out.
Bro,